Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tech Tips from the A-State IT Store. Today, we're going to be covering something you all have probably used in your life, but maybe not have ever seen. Today, we're going to be talking about the CPU in your computer, or as some people refer to it, a processor, a computer chip, etc. So to start with, let's break down what CPU actually stands for. The C stands for central, the P stands for processing, the U stands for unit. And here on the right side, we have a picture of a CPU. The gold pins that you see are what makes contact with the motherboard and sends electrical signals around the computer. So now that we are aware of the actual name of a processor, let's talk about what it does. The CPU is essentially the brain of the computer. So every action you take, as well as the reaction the computer has, comes from the CPU. The CPU also provides basic mathematic inputs and outputs. Another thing that the CPU does, it controls the logic of the computer. Logic has several different meanings, but when talking about computers, it generally refers to the series of decisions a computer makes. There's hardware logic, which is Boolean based. Booleans are a data type that can only be true or false. There's no in between. There's also software logic, which is contained in programs written by humans in a language that the computer can process and comprehend. Finally, the CPU also interprets instructions from programs and displays the data in a way that makes sense or is legible to humans. So now that we know what the purpose or use of a CPU is, let's talk about how it does all these things. So imagine a man in a box. On the inside and outside of the box, there are a series of light switches. To communicate with the man in the box, we must flip certain switches to convey a message. The man in the box is the only one that can see the lights being controlled by the switches. So the computer, or the man in the box, reads the series of on or off switches in a language called binary. Binary consists of a series of 8 characters, with each one being either 1 for on or 0 for off. This middle road between human legible writing and computer legible code is what allows us to communicate to and from the CPU. So now that we know what it does and how it does it, let's talk about what you want to look for when you're making a processor purchase. So you're going to want to look for 2 specific things to determine the quality of the chip you're going to get. You're going to look at clock speed and how many cores it has. So clock speed determines the number of times a CPU runs a cycle in 1 second. It's typically measured in gigahertz. Good CPUs typically have upwards of 3.5 gigahertz clock speed. Usually you can get a little bit less and you'll be okay. And then cores are the number of different processes you can run in 1 cycle. For example, a PC with a 4-core CPU would be able to perform 4 tasks in the same time it would take a single core CPU to complete 1 task. Good CPUs typically have upwards of 8 cores. When you're looking to make a processor purchase, most of the time you're going to come down to 2 options, either AMD or Intel. AMD, which stands for Advanced Micro Devices, has been working on their new line of chips named Ryzen since early 2016. Ryzen chips can have up to 4.9 gigahertz clock speed as well as 12 cores. And the other option, of course, is Intel. Intel has been a part of the CPU ecosystem pretty much since its birth. Their most recent line of chips are the i9 chips, which boast a boosted clock speed of 4.6 gigahertz and 18 cores. That's not to say necessarily that one is better than the other. Processor selection generally comes down to what you have in your PC and your personal opinion on each company. For what it's worth, I own a Ryzen chip, but that's just a personal preference kind of thing. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to what you want in your computer. That is going to do it for today's Tech Tips session. I'd like to thank you all for watching and make sure to stay tuned for the second part of the series, a study on the use and capabilities of RAM. Thank you all.